Welcome to part 2 of the 12 worst presidents in American history. Throughout the history of the United States, the presidency has been a position of immense power and responsibility. While many presidents have left a lasting positive impact on the nation, some have struggled to rise to the occasion, leaving behind legacies marked by controversy, ineffectiveness, or corruption. The 12 presidents often cited as the worst in American history faced significant challenges and failed to address them adequately, whether due to poor decision-making, inability to unify the nation, or scandals that undermined public trust. From the pre-Civil War era to the modern day, these leaders have become cautionary tales about the complexities of governance and the profound consequences of presidential actions. This examination delves into the shortcomings of these leaders, shedding light on the lessons learned from their presidencies and their lasting impact on the nation. Here is part 2 of the list of 12 worst presidents in the history of America. 12. Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981. Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, is often remembered for his earnest commitment to human rights, environmental issues, and energy conservation. However, his presidency, which lasted from January 20, 1977 to January 20, 1981, was marked by significant challenges and controversies that have drawn criticism. From economic difficulties to foreign policy missteps, Carter's tenure faced numerous obstacles that ultimately affected his popularity and legacy. This examination explores some of the most problematic aspects of Carter's presidency and the impact they had on the nation. One of the most significant challenges during Carter's presidency was the economic crisis known as stagflation, a combination of stagnant economic growth, high inflation, and rising unemployment. The oil crisis of the late 1970s, triggered by OPEC's oil embargo, led to skyrocketing fuel prices and energy shortages. Carter's administration struggled to effectively address these issues, and inflation reached historic highs, peaking at over 13% in 1980. Many Americans felt the pinch of rising prices, leading to widespread dissatisfaction with Carter's economic policies and contributing to a sense of national malaise. Carter's foreign policy decisions also faced scrutiny, particularly regarding the Iran hostage crisis. In November 1979, Iranian militants seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American hostages. Carter's administration was unable to secure their release for 444 days, which severely damaged his reputation. The crisis highlighted perceived weaknesses in Carter's leadership and foreign policy strategy, leading many to question his effectiveness as a commander-in-chief. The failed rescue mission in April 1980, known as Operation Eagle Claw, further compounded public disillusionment, resulting in a tragic loss of life and a sense of national humiliation. In addition to economic challenges and foreign policy crises, Carter's domestic policies faced criticism for being overly ambitious yet ineffective. His focus on energy conservation and environmental protection, while well-intentioned, often met with resistance from Congress and the public. The establishment of the Department of Energy and the promotion of energy conservation measures were seen as necessary but insufficient to alleviate the immediate economic pain felt by many Americans. Carter's approach to civil rights, while generally progressive, also faced criticism for not being forceful enough. Although he appointed a significant number of women and minorities to government positions, critics argue that he did not take strong enough action to address systemic issues such as racial inequality. His efforts were often viewed as inadequate in the face of persistent social injustices. Lastly, Carter's presidency is often associated with a perceived lack of political savvy. His insistence on moral leadership and ethical governance sometimes alienated key political allies and contributed to a lack of legislative success. His inability to effectively communicate his vision and connect with the American public led to a decline in his approval ratings and increased political polarization. Jimmy Carter's presidency was marked by noble intentions and significant challenges, but it also faced substantial criticism for its handling of economic, foreign, and domestic issues. The struggles with stagflation, the Iran hostage crisis, and a perceived lack of political effectiveness contributed to a tumultuous presidency that ultimately ended with Carter losing re-election to Ronald Reagan in 1980. While Carter's legacy includes important contributions to human rights and environmental policy, the difficulties he faced in addressing pressing national issues left a lasting impact on his standing in American history. His presidency serves as a complex case study in the challenges of leadership during turbulent times and the delicate balance between ideals and practical governance. 11. James A. Garfield, 1881. James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, served a brief and tumultuous term from March 4, 1881, until his assassination on September 19, 1881. Garfield's presidency began with great promise. He was an intelligent and articulate leader with a vision for reform. However, his time in office was marred by significant challenges, including political strife over patronage and the consequences of a deeply divided Republican Party. Despite his potential, Garfield's presidency is often overshadowed by the circumstances surrounding his assassination and the political conflicts that plagued his administration. This examination delves into the more problematic aspects of Garfield's brief tenure, highlighting decisions and events that contributed to his challenges in leadership. One of the most significant issues during Garfield's presidency was the intense political infighting over the patronage system, a practice where government jobs were given to political supporters rather than based on merit. Garfield, a supporter of civil service reform, found himself at the center of a fierce battle between two factions of the Republican Party: the stalwarts, who favored the traditional patronage system, and the half-breeds, who advocated for reform. Garfield's struggle to balance these competing interests led to a lack of clear direction in his administration. His decision to appoint reform-minded individuals to key positions alienated powerful stalwarts, including Senator Roscoe Conkling of New York. The resulting animosity culminated in significant political strife and contributed to the instability of his administration. Garfield's inability to navigate these internal conflicts effectively weakened his leadership and hampered his ability to implement his vision for reform. Additionally, Garfield's presidency was marked by a failure to tackle pressing national issues with the urgency they required. While he expressed a desire to address civil service reform and economic issues, his time was consumed by the ongoing power struggle within his party. This distraction prevented him from focusing on significant legislative initiatives that could have strengthened his presidency and addressed the concerns of the American public. Garfield's assassination on July 2, 1881, by Charles Gutel, a disgruntled office-seeker, further complicated matters. The assassination highlighted the dangers of the patronage system, as Gutel believed he was entitled to a government position after supporting Garfield's election. While Garfield's assassination was not a direct result of his actions, it underscored the volatility of the political climate of the time and the consequences of the unresolved patronage issues. Moreover, Garfield's handling of his recovery from the assassination attempt has also been criticized. After being shot, he suffered from poor medical care, particularly due to the practices of his physicians who relied on outdated medical techniques. This lack of effective medical intervention ultimately contributed to his death. While this was not a decision made by Garfield himself, it reflects the broader context of his presidency, where challenges went unaddressed and ultimately led to tragic consequences. James A. Garfield's presidency, although promising, was marred by significant challenges related to political infighting, a failure to prioritize pressing national issues, and the tragic circumstances of his assassination. His struggle to navigate the complexities of the patronage system and internal party divisions weakened his administration and limited his effectiveness as a leader. Garfield's untimely death not only cut short his potential for meaningful reform, but also exposed the dangers and consequences of a deeply divided political landscape. As history reflects on Garfield's presidency, it serves as a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by leaders in navigating political strife and the importance of addressing systemic issues for the greater good of the nation. 10. Chester A. Arthur, 1881 to 1885. Chester A. Arthur, the 21st President of the United States, served from September 19, 1881, to March 4, 1885, following the assassination of James A. Garfield. Initially seen as a political insider and a product of the patronage system, Arthur surprised many by advocating for civil service reform during his presidency. However, his time in office was not without its shortcomings and controversies. While Arthur made some strides in reform, he also faced significant challenges, including political infighting, a lack of decisive leadership on pressing issues, and a mixed record on civil rights. This examination will explore the more problematic aspects of Arthur's presidency and how they impacted his legacy. One of the most significant criticisms of Chester A. Arthur's presidency was his initial alignment with the Stalwarts, a faction of the Republican Party that supported the traditional patronage system. Before becoming president, Arthur had been a prominent stalwart, and many questioned whether he could truly transition into a reform-minded leader. Despite his later support for civil service reform, his early appointments and political maneuvering reflected the entrenched patronage system that many Americans sought to change. This inconsistency raised doubts about his commitment to genuine reform. Arthur's presidency was also marked by political infighting and a lack of effective governance. Although he advocated for the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act in 1883, which established a merit-based system for federal employment, his administration struggled to implement these reforms effectively. The act faced resistance from those who benefited from the patronage system, and Arthur's inability to build a strong coalition for reform limited its impact. Critics argue that while he made some progress, his efforts were often half-hearted and lacked the vigor necessary to create lasting change. Furthermore, Arthur's approach to immigration and labor issues has drawn criticism. During his presidency, there was a significant influx of immigrants, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe. While Arthur did not take strong action against immigrants, he failed to address the growing nativist sentiment in the country. His administration's response to labor unrest, including strikes and protests, was often seen as inadequate. The lack of a comprehensive labor policy during a time of significant social upheaval failed to address the needs of workers, leading to further discontent and unrest. Arthur's handling of foreign policy also faced criticism, particularly regarding the U.S. relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean. His administration's approach was often seen as inconsistent and reactive rather than proactive. For example, the U.S. response to the 1884 to 1885 crisis in Chile, where American sailors were attacked, was criticized as overly cautious and ineffective. This lack of decisive action contributed to a perception of weakness in American foreign policy during his presidency. Additionally, Arthur's administration has been criticized for its failure to address issues of civil rights, particularly concerning African Americans. Although he did make some appointments of African Americans to federal positions, his administration did not take strong stances against the growing tide of Jim Crow laws and racial segregation in the South. Arthur's reluctance to confront racism and advocate for civil rights left many African Americans disillusioned and marginalized during his presidency. Chester A. Arthur's presidency, while marked by moments of reform and progress, was also characterized by significant shortcomings and challenges. His initial ties to the patronage system struggles with political infighting, inadequate responses to labor issues, and a lack of decisive action in foreign policy all contributed to a mixed legacy. While Arthur did advocate for civil service reform with the Pendleton Act, his overall effectiveness as a leader was often undermined by the complexities of the political landscape and his inconsistent approach to pressing national issues. As history reflects on Arthur's time in office, it serves as a reminder of the challenges leaders face in navigating political divisions and the importance of a strong commitment to reform and addressing the needs of a changing nation. 9. Martin Van Buren, 1837 to 1841. Martin Van Buren, the 8th President of the United States, served from 1837 to 1841 during a period of significant economic and political turbulence. A key architect of the Democratic Party and a close ally of Andrew Jackson, Van Buren entered the presidency with high expectations. However, his time in office was marked by a series of challenges that ultimately undermined his leadership and reputation. This examination delves into the most problematic aspects of Van Buren's presidency, focusing on his handling of the economic crisis known as the Panic of 1837 his approach to slavery, and his failure to effectively communicate with the public. One of the most significant failures of Van Buren's presidency was his handling of the Panic of 1837, a major financial crisis that erupted shortly after he took office. The crisis was triggered by a combination of factors, including speculative land practices, a collapse in the banking system, and a decline in international trade. As banks failed and businesses collapsed, millions of Americans faced unemployment and financial ruin. Van Buren's response to the crisis was largely seen as inadequate and ineffective. He believed in a limited government approach, which meant he was reluctant to intervene in the economy or provide direct relief to those suffering. Van Buren's insistence on maintaining a balanced budget further complicated his response to the economic crisis. He rejected proposals for federal assistance to banks and businesses, arguing that such measures would only exacerbate the problems. His focus on fiscal conservatism, while principled, led to widespread suffering among Americans who were desperate for help. This lack of decisive action contributed to a perception of Van Buren as out of touch and ineffective, and his approval ratings plummeted. Another significant aspect of Van Buren's presidency was his approach to the issue of slavery. While he personally opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, he was cautious in addressing the issue, aiming to maintain party unity and avoid alienating Southern Democrats. His administration faced growing tensions over the question of slavery, particularly with the emergence of the abolitionist movement. Van Buren's failure to take a strong stance on slavery and his attempts to appease both pro- and anti-slavery factions resulted in a lack of clear leadership on a critical moral issue. This reluctance to confront the growing divide over slavery ultimately undermined his legacy and contributed to the fracturing of the Democratic Party. Additionally, Van Buren's presidency was marked by a failure to effectively communicate with the public. His aloof demeanor and lack of charisma made it difficult for him to connect with ordinary Americans, particularly during the economic hardships of the Panic of 1837. While he was skilled in political maneuvering and party organization, his inability to inspire confidence and rally public support during a crisis diminished his effectiveness as a leader. This communication gap contributed to growing discontent and dissatisfaction with his administration. Finally, Van Buren's decision to support the establishment of an independent treasury system in 1840, while an important reform, was too late to address the immediate economic crisis. This policy aimed to stabilize the economy by separating government finances from private banks, but by the time it was implemented, the economic situation had already deteriorated significantly. Critics argue that his late response to the financial crisis showcased a broader pattern of indecisiveness and mismanagement. Martin Van Buren's presidency was marked by significant challenges and failures that hindered his effectiveness as a leader. His inadequate response to the Panic of 1837, reluctance to take a strong stance on slavery, and failure to communicate effectively with the public contributed to a legacy of disappointment. While he played a crucial role in shaping the Democratic Party and navigating complex political landscapes, his inability to address pressing national issues left a lasting impact on his reputation. As history reflects on Van Buren's presidency, it serves as a reminder of the importance of decisive leadership and the need to confront critical moral issues in a rapidly changing nation. 8. William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913. William Howard Taft, the 27th President of the United States, served from 1909 to 1913. Initially seen as the successor to Theodore Roosevelt, Taft's presidency was marked by significant challenges and controversies that ultimately undermined his popularity and effectiveness as a leader. While he made notable contributions to antitrust regulation and domestic policy, his administration faced considerable backlash over issues such as tariff reform, civil rights, and his relationship with Roosevelt. This examination delves into the problematic aspects of Taft's presidency, highlighting decisions and actions that contributed to his struggles in office. One of the most significant criticisms of Taft's presidency was his handling of tariff reform. The Payne-Aldrich Tariff of 1909, which Taft supported, was intended to lower tariffs but ended up maintaining high rates on many goods. This angered progressive Republicans who had expected genuine reform, leading to disillusionment within the party. The tariffs passage was seen as a betrayal of Roosevelt's progressive legacy and fueled a divide between the conservative and progressive factions of the Republican Party. Taft's inability to effectively navigate this division alienated many of his supporters and damaged his credibility as a reformer. Taft's presidency also faced significant criticism regarding civil rights issues. Although he had a reputation as a moderate and was personally sympathetic to African American rights, Taft's administration took a lackluster approach to race relations. He failed to advocate strongly for civil rights legislation, which disappointed many African American leaders who had hoped for more vigorous action. The appointment of a number of Southern Democrats to his administration further alienated progressive supporters and led to accusations of complicity in the perpetuation of racial discrimination. Another area of concern during Taft's presidency was his relationship with Theodore Roosevelt. The rift between the two men, once close allies, became public and damaging. After Taft's presidency, Roosevelt became increasingly critical of Taft's policies, particularly regarding the tariff and conservation issues. The split led to the formation of the Progressive Party and ultimately contributed to Taft's loss in the 1912 election. This intra-party conflict weakened the Republican Party and highlighted Taft's struggles to assert his own leadership independent of Roosevelt's legacy. In terms of foreign policy, Taft's dollar diplomacy aimed to promote American financial interests abroad, particularly in Latin America and East Asia. While the policy sought to stabilize regions through economic investment, it often backfired and was perceived as an extension of imperialism. Critics argued that it prioritized American business interests over the needs and sovereignty of other nations, leading to resentment and hostility toward the U.S. This approach to foreign policy did not foster the goodwill that Taft had hoped for and contributed to a negative perception of his administration. Finally, Taft's overall demeanor and lack of charisma affected his presidency. Unlike Roosevelt, who was dynamic and engaging, Taft was often seen as reserved and lacking enthusiasm. His inability to connect with the public and inspire confidence during a time of significant change contributed to his unpopularity. This disconnect hindered his ability to effectively communicate his policies and rally support, making it difficult for him to implement his agenda successfully. William Howard Taft's presidency was marked by significant challenges and controversies that ultimately undermined his effectiveness as a leader. His mishandling of tariff reform, lack of decisive action on civil rights, struggles with his relationship with Theodore Roosevelt, and ineffective foreign policy all contributed to a troubled administration. While Taft made important contributions to antitrust regulation and sought to continue Roosevelt's progressive legacy, his inability to navigate the complexities of his time left a mixed legacy. As history reflects on Taft's presidency, it serves as a reminder of the importance of political unity, effective communication, and the need for strong leadership in addressing the pressing issues of the nation. 7. Millard Fillmore, 1850 to 1853. Millard Fillmore, the 13th President of the United States, served from 1850 to 1853 during a tumultuous period marked by intense national debates over slavery and sectionalism. Ascending to the presidency after the death of Zachary Taylor, Fillmore's time in office is often characterized by his attempts to maintain peace between the North and South. However, his decisions, particularly regarding the Compromise of 1850 and its implications for slavery, have drawn significant criticism. This exploration examines the most problematic aspects of Fillmore's presidency, highlighting how his actions contributed to the growing divisions that ultimately led to the Civil War. One of the most significant and controversial actions of Fillmore's presidency was his support for the Compromise of 1850, a series of legislative measures aimed at addressing the contentious issue of slavery in the territories acquired from Mexico. While the compromise was intended to ease tensions between the North and South, it included the Fugitive Slave Act, which mandated that escaped slaves be returned to their owners even if they were found in free states. This law was vehemently opposed by many in the North, who viewed it as a moral abomination and an infringement on states' rights. Fillmore's endorsement of the Fugitive Slave Act alienated many Northern supporters and intensified anti-slavery sentiment. The law not only encouraged the capture and return of escaped slaves, but also imposed penalties on individuals who assisted them. This led to increased tensions between pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions, fueling the abolitionist movement and contributing to a culture of resistance in the North. Fillmore's willingness to compromise with Southern interests at the expense of human rights has led many historians to view him as ineffective and morally lacking. Additionally, Fillmore's presidency is marked by his failure to address the growing unrest and violence surrounding the issue of slavery. The conflicts in Kansas, known as Bleeding Kansas, arose from the implementation of popular sovereignty, allowing territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. Fillmore's administration took little action to mitigate the violence or address the concerns of those advocating for abolition. His lack of decisive leadership during this critical time contributed to the deepening divide between the North and South. Fillmore's foreign policy also drew criticism, particularly regarding his approach to Japan. While he did send Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan to open trade relations, the methods used were seen as heavy-handed and reflective of an imperialistic attitude. The portrayal of America as a bully on the international stage was at odds with the ideals of diplomacy and respect for sovereignty. Furthermore, Fillmore's presidency is often criticized for its overall lack of significant accomplishments. He struggled to build a strong political coalition, often finding himself isolated within his own party. His inability to effectively communicate a cohesive vision for the nation, combined with the rising sectional tensions, contributed to his unpopularity and the eventual decline of the Whig Party. Millard Fillmore's presidency was marked by significant failures in leadership and moral judgment, particularly in his handling of the slavery issue and the Compromise of 1850. His endorsement of the Fugitive Slave Act and the lack of effective response to the violence and unrest surrounding slavery have cast a long shadow over his time in office. While he sought to maintain peace between the North and South, his actions ultimately contributed to the growing tensions that would lead to the Civil War. Fillmore's presidency serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of compromising principles for political expediency and the profound consequences of failing to address the moral crises facing a nation. Do you want to know the next worst president on this list? Then continue in the next episode.